Now I'll tell you one more story about how climate change is reported. And that's, this is a cover of the New York Times Magazine, saying that this Kiribati is threatened by rising sea levels from climate change. And they've got this, this photo that shows this poor woman, fighting her, kind of a hopeless task of fighting these rising seas. And here's the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, who gave a press conference, standing in the water to try and drive home the point that his island is disappearing. Well, all right, so Kiribati, 16 islands, it used to be called the Gilbert Islands. Well, I looked up in the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica what the area was. Well, 166 square miles. The current land area of those 16 islands is 281 square miles. Well, turns out, right, that you can reclaim land, and that's what's been happening over the years, that they've gone out, and so the islands are not disappearing at all. In fact, they have added area to them. In Tuvalu, there was an academic study that was done on land area in these islands, in the journal on Nature Communications is the name of the journal, and they found that local sea level has risen, even though local sea level has risen, but there's been a net increase in the land area of Tuvalu. That's kind of surprising, but when you think about it, it's not so crazy, right? There are a lot of islands that are flat and very low. That makes you think, well, when sea level was lower, maybe they were some kind of plateau, and when the sea level rises, they will disappear very suddenly when the sea level gets above that. But that's not how things work. As sea level rises, these islands change. Coral reefs change, and sediment that's deposited changes. And they found that over a fairly short period of time, these islands actually grew as sea level rose. Now, the Prime Minister of Tuvalu was not happy with this, right? And he said, as the leader of Tuvalu, I find it totally unfortunate that this news item was never allowed responding or verifying by Tuvalu authorities. Boy, if you're going to write something, you better check with us first. And he said the Tuvaluan government will respond to this report and we'll post it. And he said exactly what website they were going to post that response to. Well, I've been checking that website and they have not posted any response at all. And if you look at the world as a whole, land area in 1924, land area in 2024, it's actually a little more. And there was a paper done on this in an academic journal, looking at Earth's surface water change over the past 30 years. And National Geographic actually did a nice summary of that paper, where they said a new study found that there's actually slightly more land surface exposed than there was 30 years ago. And surprisingly, coastal areas also had a net gain of land. So this whole narrative about what the canary in the coal mine, or these small island nations that are going to disappear because of climate change, just turns out to be false, and kind of fits the pattern that I'm finding on the papers on climate change and economic growth. So anyway, that's what I've been playing around with the last couple of years, and it's been kind of fun, but surprising to me that, again, the authors just don't respond. They just ignore this work. Even though we've had some attention. I got 3 articles in the Wall Street Journal op-ed sections. I've had it written up in other places. I've done radio interviews and television interviews. Silence. Absolutely no response at all. So anyway, that's what I'm doing.
Well, we're certainly going to open it up to Q&A. And I'm just going to let you go ahead and direct that.
All right, thanks. Sure.
So how did you get the data when you replicated the author's results? Did you have to ask them for it, or were public resources, or what?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Now, this has been a really positive trend in the economics academic literature, that most journals now require people to post their data and code. So in some cases, for the Dell paper, for example, I was able to download all of that and work on it. Now, I think it was the Kiley paper, where he had not, because this was a Federal Reserve paper that was not published in a journal yet, although he's doing that now. And I emailed him, no response, would not give me the data or the code. But his data were from an earlier paper that I was able to get the data from, and I reconstructed his code and got exactly his results. So in some cases it's been reconstruction, other cases I can just get it from people. Yep.
David, It strikes me that what you're doing is forensics, econometric forensics, or whatever you want to. You're the CSI of these. But and I commend you for it. It must be torture just to like get into these things. And what do you attribute though? It's kind of a fraud, and it reminds me. You probably know this paper from the mid-'80s in these major economic journals. Leamer, I think it was, said, let's take the con out of econometrics.
Yeah.
The con jobs and stuff. These are professional journals, peer reviewed. Do you think they're just biased looking for a result? Climate change is terrible. And therefore they'll take any bad, shoddy. Is that it, or is it something else?
I think that that's basically it. You don't want to reject a paper that helps the climate narrative, especially when it comes from really prominent people like this. And it's easy to generate phony results, right? I mean, what's often called p-hacking, right? So a result is considered statistically significant if there's less than a 1 in 20 chance that it could have been generated from random data, all right? Well, what's the solution to that? If you want to publish, run it 20 times, right? Run it 20 times with different model specifications, different data, different ways of cutting the data. By chance, doing it 20 times, you're going to find one that has statistically significant results. And you publish that, and you don't tell anyone about all the other ones that you did. All right? So you do that, and you're a prominent person, and you're publishing on a popular topic, you're going to get published.
You mentioned sea level rise, but did you delve into the fact there's land subsidence due to pumping fresh water and so forth?
Yes, that's true, and the study that I mentioned takes that into account, that there are areas of the world that are underwater, inland areas that are underwater that didn't used to be. But even taking all of that account, we've got slightly more land than we had 100 years ago.
Thanks for that presentation. On a bit of a tangent, I'm curious about Iowa, and particularly northern Iowa, like farming. Have you noticed or come across interesting developments in what's happening with the agriculture around there?
Well, the most interesting development in northern Iowa agriculture is that I have a commercial lending business, and I've loaned to some farms that happen to be in northern Iowa, and 2 of them are in default, and I'm foreclosing on the farms. So that's I don't know, one aspect, but the yields are up, right? I mean, if you follow, all the years the temperature, reported temperatures have been going up for a while, and yields have been increasing. So there doesn't seem to be any evidence from that climate change is damaging agriculture in any way. I mean, the yields, corn yields in Iowa are far higher than they were, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
So it's been trending to be more productive for a few decades?
Sorry?
It's trended as more productive
Yes,
for a few decades?
absolutely. Yeah, for many decades. I mean, it's been trending more productive for a long time, for 100 years.
Do you know, since the mid-1800s, did it ever have a period of significant decrease in production?
Not that I know of. So Iowa State University publishes some information on yields going back quite a ways, and I think it's just been technological progress that has been driving this. That you've just got better methods of harvesting, better seed varieties and things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
2 questions. First of all, where did you your
Oh,
article
Econ Journal Watch. So that's the name of the journal. Again, Econ Journal Watch, and the specialty of that journal is critiquing economics papers that are published in other journals.
Now, the other is, did any of these papers try to consider looking at also the cost of preventing the war? In other words, the CO2 mitigation efforts and the cost of that, and looking at the net effect.
Yeah, that's a great question. I testified on this in front of the Senate Budget Committee back in October, and Senator Kennedy asked me that question. Believe me, if you've seen any of the YouTube videos of Senator Kennedy, you really don't want to be grilled by Senator Kennedy, right? But he had, and I really didn't know, the answer to how much it would cost. And I've looked at that since, and the estimates are very, very large as to what the cost would be of being carbon neutral, say by 2050. And there are a lot of interesting examples of cost-benefit analysis. For example, that there are efforts to change the basic way that electric transformers work. And it makes them a lot more expensive. And it saves some energy. And when you look at the cost benefit of that, it makes, doesn't make any sense at all. So yes, a lot of these things are very expensive. Now, if climate change was really going to mean the end of the world, well, it'd definitely be worth spending that money. And that's really a big reason why I got into this, because when I read the abstracts of these papers, I thought, well, if they're right, I really ought to become a climate activist. If it's really going to cut rates of growth by a third, I mean, economic growth, this is something that Bob Lucas at the University of Chicago used to say, once you start thinking about economic growth, you can't think about anything else in economics. It's the most important thing. Per capita economic growth over time is what has given us everything that we have and what our hopes for the future. And so if higher temperatures would cut that, it's worth doing a lot. But the cost-benefit analysis I've seen doesn't give you much reason to adopt those policies. Yeah.
The 6.5 degrees temperature rise you talk about quantitative computer models, right? Quantitative computer models.
Okay.
They don't work, okay?
Well.
But if you'd like to read an interesting book from Duke, there's a professor named Hilton, and he wrote a book called Useless Arithmetic.
Okay.
And it goes completely through like why the Grand Banks of Newfoundland quantitative computer models, and on and on. So they're using models, it's not just the climate people, they're used all over the place, that don't work. And they explain that book exactly why they don't work. It's an interesting book, it's called Useless Arithmetic.
Okay, well, in economics, we have some experience with big, complicated models, macro models that are supposed, like the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has this big model that is supposed to, predict the economy, predict inflation, predict unemployment, all these sorts of things. Terrible record of forecasting. I mean, just terrible. If you go to their website and look at their forecasts, they put appropriate error bands on them, which makes them absolutely useless for anything practical, right? So, but they're very carefully thought out models. A lot of smart people have put a lot of time into them, but they don't work. And that's one reason that has made me skeptical of the climate models, just the absolute failure in economics. Yeah.
You may know there's a subgroup within the environmental movement called degrowth.
Yes.
So they're not even for growth, and they want to shrink it back. So I mean, you could say to them, okay, if you want degrowth, let's just go full tilt industrial, and you're predicting it'll curb growth, so that's good.
Yes.
And so get them to say, good, so let capitalism run grid, and you'll get your degrowth. I mean, it's kind of kooky, but they're kooky. So I mean,
There is that's right.
That everyone wants growth is not.
That's a good point, and in this presentation I am kind of assuming that that's a positive thing. Yeah. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I have thought a little about population growth, and the long-term forecasts are for population in the world to fall. Fertility rates are plummeting in a lot of parts of the world. And it's expected that even in areas that have high fertility, that it will eventually start to fall. In Japan, you're already seeing population decline. China, it's forecast to come down a lot. And I think it's an interesting question. Is that a bad thing or not? And we often hear everyone talks about growth in the local chambers of commerce, and growth is what they want in population. And I wonder if we want growth in per capita income. I firmly believe that is crucial and super important. But is the fact that population might fall, is that a bad thing? I don't know. I think it's a hard question. But I think that would that may be, I don't know, maybe that would satisfy those people if we could have, if population goes down for whatever reason, but we continue to have growth. I wonder if they would be opposed to that. If we could have population decline, would they still be opposed to per capita growth? That would be an interesting question.
To sort of follow up on my previous question, did any of these papers say, okay, we're going to have these costs, at the end say, and now here's what we can do about it. If we implement X, temperatures will be this much less by the year, blah, 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 and mitigate this problem by...
No. So these papers are taking a very narrow question and saying that higher temperatures are going to hurt growth. And the idea is then, okay, somebody else should take on what we can do to reduce those temperatures. And I mentioned that the Kiley paper had been published, so he just published that paper recently. And so he had seen my paper before he published this new version, and he did make a few changes, but he didn't make any of the important ones. It's kind of interesting. And he doesn't footnote my paper at all, doesn't acknowledge that it exists. So my next project is going to be to take on that paper and show that the few changes that he did make to show that those don't help him at all.
Okay, thank you.
Sure,
very
thank
much.
you. Thanks.
I like Professor Saltzman's idea of CSI, climate science investigator. And I think you've given us basically a model for just thinking about all the issues that we're confronted with, and that is just challenge the data, let's ask questions, and that's really what I think Bastiat Society is about too. I mean, we're here, we're trying to at least put out the idea that we're not going to just accept what everybody is saying. We need to think, and we need to have a dialogue in this country, and that's not happening. And so I'm really proud of the many speakers that we have, and I want to thank you so much, David, for coming and talking. And I wanted to just also explain that the way that I found out about David Barker is that I was reading one of his articles in the Wall Street Journal, and I thought, this guy's really sharp. I really want to get him to speak, and found out that he had actually written an article for AIER, and then Googled, and you were gracious enough to say yes. And then while we had you on the agenda, of course, you published another article in the Wall Street Journal, basically on this topic. And so it's really cool I think you're going to be really famous here in the next few years, and we're going to say, I was there when David Barker started challenging this stuff, because it's literally costing the world billions and billions of dollars right now because of the false data and the false policies that people are proceeding upon. We have next month, we have Justice. I always do this. I always look at Jenna, because you're the one who remembers people's names, and when I'm standing up here, I can't remember. Mark Martin is a former Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina. Really pleased to have him. We'll have other exciting events. Tell your friends about today's event. Spread the news wide and far. We'll be coming out with a YouTube video. And thank you very much. Please contribute.